Welcome back to Lokad. Today I have the pleasure of hosting a conversation between Eric Wilson and Joannes Vermorel. Eric is the Director of Thought Leadership at the Institute of Business Forecasting, and he's the host of the IBF On Demand podcast. Now, Eric is a vocal proponent of S&OP, and this conversation is intended to serve as a nuanced follow-up to the debate Joannes Vermorel did with Milos Verzic several months ago. As always, if you like what you hear, subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn. And with that out of the way, I give you today's conversation between Eric Wilson and Joannes Vermorel. Well, first of all, Eric, thank you very much for joining us. You are a man, you wear many, many hats. You're a writer, you're a podcaster, you're a director of thought leadership, you're a consultant, you're a public speaker. Those are a lot of titles. Could you perhaps, for our audience who might not be as familiar, could you give more insight into who is the man behind those titles?
Well, the man behind the title has actually had a few decades of practitioner experience. Always, I have scars to prove it. If you want to see my scars, I have scars to prove it. I was a practitioner, did a lot of transformational projects with a lot of organizations, worked in supply chain, S&OP, all the different hats there as well. Now I'm currently the Director of Thought Leadership with IBF. I do some consulting as well. That is just a fancy way of saying that liaison between what companies are doing now, being able to share it with other organizations, kind of that best or what I like to call next practices. I work with organizations and do in-house training and do conferences and do writing and kind of that facilitate discussions like you do with organizations of here's what we see in the industry and here's what we see it going.
Well, thank you. And again, mentioning writing, that was actually more or less how we first got in contact about this discussion. You mentioned, you mentioned that you had written a book. It's Practical Guide to Sales and Operations. You sent us over a copy. Thank you very much. And I'm just curious, did you pour all your scars into that book, or why did you write that? What was the journey like?
Yeah, that was actually my second professional. I had predictive analytics for business forecasting about 3 years ago. My most recent book was the Practical Guide for Sales and Operations Planning. And the reason it came about is because there really is a void when it comes to a new text, modernized text in the data and AI era post-COVID of really what that process is. So when I say I poured my scars, yeah, I did, but I also poured everybody else's scars into that as well. The beauty of that book is I didn't write 40% of it. I actually had a co-author with it that helped me write a lot of the book as well. But a lot of that book was curated. The IBF, Institute of Business Forecasting, been around for 42 years. It's a professional organization that's really built by practitioners for practitioners. We have a quarterly journal of business forecasting that comes out, and there's a lot of great practitioner articles, peer-reviewed articles in that journal. About 40% of this book is curated from those articles. So with other subject matter experts, thought leaders in the field, that I was able to curate and put together and synthesize that information. So we have a one source now that really shows where the S&OP is today, where it's going, the nuances of it from multiple perspectives. And that was really makes it special.
Well, actually, that's a really, really salient point to raise, because one of the reasons we wanted to bring you on in particular was Joannes several months ago had done a debate on S&OP with Milos Verzic, a friend of the channel, and we wanted to revisit a bit of some of the claims that were made in a less formal, less timed and rigorous structure. And reaching out to you meant also getting access to all those perspectives that you just described. So one of the reasons I'm looking forward to this is it's not just your perspective, but having curated that book, you can cite the experiences of many, many other practitioners. So on that point, let's somewhat get into it. So as I said, the idea here in my introduction was to have more of a nuanced, freer follow-up to the debate that Joannes had done. And what I wanted to do was take some of the key claims that Joannes had made, some provocative, unlike your style, but it's a little bit provocative.
It may happen.
It may
accidentally,
happen from time to time.
Don't.
It can happen. And then, just go back and forth and see where we agree, disagree, rather than just a general ranging discussion where everyone just kind of jumps off into different directions. So before we get into that, I'll ask you both. I'll start with Joannes. Your executive summary when it comes to S&OP. So what is it that you dislike? What is it you like? What is your position here today about S&OP?
So first, the way I think of S&OP is, first, I think about the problem. The problem is a large company who operates an equivalently large supply chain has a big synchronization problem. It means that you have thousands, potentially tens of thousands of people doing different things at the same time. And ultimately, you want to orchestrate all of that so that you serve your clients better and more profitably. And this synchronization, the fact that you're promoting what you're going to sell, that you manufacture what you're going to sell, that you have in stock what people want to buy extra, all of that is not a given. You need a way to achieve this kind of company-wide synchronization between demand and supply and many other forces. So that's the problem. And I see S&OP as one solution, candidate solution for this problem. Now,
so you like it?
So no, I say it's one solution. Don't say I am not, my position is not it's the best solution. I think it's not a good solution. I think in terms of characterization, I think it's a solution that emerged from a paradigm that is very much people-centric. It means that information flow through people. And the idea is to have a series of meetings so that we will have this information flowing through the company. And then that is through this process that is very people-oriented that we will achieve the synchronization. And I see that as, generally speaking, as the biggest flaw, as opposed to an alternative paradigm that would say machine first, information is flowing from computers, and people are only involved in structuring the flow of information, structuring the way decisions are computed, as opposed to being involved with the flow and being involved with the decision. And that would be, the crux of probably my position.
Okay. And Eric, you've heard a lot. Again, we'll get into the details of some of those claims a little bit later, but you heard Joannes' overview, your thoughts.
What I just heard was supply chain management is what I just heard. And I mean, I think that's what you described is the problem is supply chain management. It's complex. We try to oversimplify it. And it's as soon as you have the people aspect, you're going to have limitations of it. We're all about flow. And when you go textbook supply chain management, it is goods flow and information flow. And when you add people to try to manage that, you have issues. And that's what I just heard. My perspective and what I picked up when I looked at S&OP more holistically, sales and operations planning, IBP, I don't care what we call it. It's all the same. But it's a business process that aligns all functional areas around a unified set of assumptions for coordinated decision making. The keys in that is it is a business process. It's not supply chain management. It's a business process. We're aligning all functional areas. It's not balancing supply and demand. We're aligning the company. We're aligning all functional areas. Unified set of assumptions. I'm not saying a one number, but I'm saying we're aligned to the assumptions. We're aligned to the strategy of the organization, and that's the key. And it's for coordinated decision making. It's a decision making form. It's not transactional. It's not try to, create. Here's the plan I need to do in the tactical operational standpoint. It is a decision making forum for business. If that's what it really is. So I understand the supply chain management argument, but this is a business process.
Joannes, does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, that's, I see your position. Mm-hmm. Then you see, my take is that the distinction between supply chain and business, for me, it's the frontiers are very fuzzy. Mm-hmm. That's again the thing. I prefer to go for things that are a little bit more factual, such as we're talking of decisions. Mm. Let's just count the decisions. So I would say survey the decisions. It's going to be for every product, do I invest and how much in advertising and where? How much what will be my price point? Do I buy materials to produce them? Where do I produce them? In which quantity? According to which timeline? So we can enumerate all those decisions. Some decisions belong to what people would call supply and demand planning, like purchasing materials. Some, like pricing, usually do not belong to this area. They belong to other areas, typically marketing. The budget investments, for example, budgeting how much advertising is going to spend, that's going to be yet another things. You see, and my take is just that at scale, and that will be, a base to have this discussion. When we talk about those decisions, we are talking for large-scale decisions or large-scale company of tens of thousands of daily decisions, potentially millions if we're talking of a $10 billion plus company. And my take is just that when people describe a business process to generate those decisions, I would say, yes, obviously those decisions are made, but you see the challenge is that is the business process that you describe contribute to making better decisions? And my counter, proposal to that would be those committees, because that's what it looked like. Whenever I see an S&OP process in action, it is like a series of meetings that looks like committees, and those committees, perception, do not contribute meaningfully to improve those decision-making processes when it comes to generate, again, tens of thousands of daily decisions. That's, my counter-argument to that.
And when you're looking at those thousands or, million different decisions that are done daily, I fully agree. And when you're looking at automating, you have capability of automating those decisions, because everything you talked about was a lot transactional, pricing, where the inventory should be, manufacturing decision, those are transactional decisions, and 100% agree. A lot of those should be automated, and you can be able to create efficiencies, create better precision with some automation there. What you aren't being able to automate right now is the strategy side of things. When you're looking at it from a product committee, product review, the output of that is not, here's the SKU I'm going to do, here's the SKU I'm going to discontinue. The output of that is a brand strategy. The brand strategy drives the systems, drives the people right now, as far as the tactical execution and transactional decisions. Coming out of a demand review, the output's not a forecast. The output is, what is my channel strategy? What is my customer strategies? That is the output of a demand review or that demand committee. The transactional decisions of that are, what are we going to order? What are we going to do? Where we're going to place the information? How we're going to price it? Those are the output. Those are the transactional outputs. Same with supply. Supply ultimately isn't just balancing and transact. It's a optimization or fulfillment strategy. And that's based on what's going to be right not only for the customer, but what's right for the company as well. When you get to the strategy sides of things, and that what really drives a mature S&OP process, that is beyond transactional. And that's the part you're not automating yet.
I very much agree on the fact that strategy is not part of the realm of stuff that we can automate yet. I agree with that. Now, my counter argument would be, I have never seen a meeting with more than 20, let's say 10 people do anything of strategic relevance. And you see, the problem is that most of the strategic decisions are terrifying. They are brutal. People are going to be turned to dust through the process. And just to give you an example, let's imagine we have like a strategic meeting with Boeing. What would it entail? It would be a discussion about what if we have 2 planes that crash next week, killing 500 people, and what next? What do we do? And by the way, this is a very real possibility. I'm not saying that it's likely. I really pray that it doesn't happen. But is there every single week a 0.1% chance that it can happen? Yes. And now it's not much, but it's not zero. And so you see, I've never seen any of those like life and death, brutal discussion happen in a kind of committee. Sometimes you need to go for very difficult decision. For example, Boeing has been like a series I'm taking on Boeing just so that for continuity of the example, Boeing had been sleeping in terms of engineering culture for 2 decades. I don't know if it's SpaceX that just happened to hire all the good engineers of Boeing or whatever. But so that's a very, very tough problem that need to be asked. You see, so your strategy, that's where I say I do not see strategic decisions ever being made in this sort of company. If we look at a company, another historical example would be Nokia, who went from paper production, because Nokia was doing paper, then they did phones, and then they lost it all because they never transitioned to smartphones against Apple. But you see, those sort of strategic inflection, I do not see that ever happening in a committee. In a committee, the typical pattern is bike shedding. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this concept of bike shedding. You know, that's from the laws of Parkinson, where people take an easy issue and they will bike shed like, oh, this super stable product category, will it grow 3% next year or will it shrink 2% next year? Those are like gentle questions.
Really easy topics to cover.
They don't challenge, you know, anything. I don't see in a committee people ever discussing things like, you guys, all of you should just be fired. You know, it's very. Imagine again, just look at Elon Musk, what he did at Twitter. He over the course of 1 year and a half, he fired 90% of his company. You know, some left, some were fired. This is not the sort of things that is very strategic, but can you realistically have a discussion in a meeting with 20 people where you're going to discuss, we are going to fire half of us? Let's vote. Who is, I mean, sorry, it's just...
Well, if I can just build on that point, because I also do want to demonstrate that I read your book, Eric, because I went straight to the table of contents because I knew I'd read about what is efficient decision making. So you have a section there in your book. There are 6 elements of what you... I know there's an essay later written by somebody else, but I'm presuming that the unlabeled sections are from you. And there is one section of the efficient decision making where you discuss scenario planning. And again, I'm going to quote back, and then the question comes. So given the inherent uncertainty, as Joannes, in his Boeing example, the inherent uncertainty in business environments, S&OP decision-making often involves scenario planning. Planners develop multiple scenarios based on different assumptions about demand, supply chain disruptions, planes falling out of skies, you didn't write that, and other variables. By simulating these scenarios and assessing their potential impact, decision makers can evaluate various courses of action and develop robust contingency plans to mitigate risks. So having read that, and sounds cool, I'm all on board, coming back to the example that Joannes just gave of, okay, if you're at an enormous company like Boeing, there are low probability but potentially catastrophic events that could happen. Are you going to stand up in an S&OP meeting and say, all right, well, if one plane falls out of the sky, here is our financial risk? I mean, that's an unpopular and very tricky thing to cover in real time, face-to-face with many, many people. So again, my question is, do you see those kinds of scenarios, low probability but do happen, being covered in the types of processes and S&OP meetings you advocate?
It depends. It depends on the company. It depends on their what they needed to focus on, what they should focus on. But it greatly depends on the maturity of the organization and maturity of the process as well. Because even the statements that you just read from my book, when you're looking at scenario planning, that in itself has a maturity inside of an organization. And half of the organizations, probably, close to 60, 2/3 of the organizations out there fit within the exact definition that you were describing, saying that they focus on the wrong things. They're doing scenario planning because they don't have the being able to enable data and technology to do it for them. So they have this as a resource and as a process to help enable those decision makings for that level of maturity in that organization. And for them, absolutely, they're talking about supply and demand balancing. They're talking about what if we do pricing, what if we do, and they're talking about exactly those things that you mentioned we could automate, but they're not, and they have this as their resource to be able to make those decisions. As organizations continue to get more mature, we have seen organizations out there, and they do exist, that do have more strategic decisions. Target is a great example. Target that looks at as far as being able to plan their footprint long term based on decisions of where they want to go to market, cash, a lot of other executive strategic decisions that are now being compiled and saying, hey, based on this, this is what we want to do. We see the same things with Clorox and Microsoft. These organizations have more mature S&OP processes that are bringing strategy now into their organization. So even the what if scenarios, that becomes a maturity, and it takes on a little bit different meaning as you get more mature.
And I do want, thank you, Eric. And I do want to come back to get your take on this, but I want to add a little bit, because again, a term you used there, Eric, maturity. So companies that have more mature processes. So Joannes, in your answer, do you agree with the idea that to make the kinds of pivots in terms of better decision making that you would advocate, that maturity is an aspect? Because I know you previously had made a nice distinction. You'd used words I'd never heard before. It was precocial and altricial. So some animals are born precocial, meaning that
I don't even know those words.
Yeah, exactly.
He uses big words.
He speaks English better than I do. It's ridiculous. Precocial. Animals that are born and are able to walk almost immediately. So certain, like horses, for example, they're born, they can run and frolic and all of that immediately. Altricial, humans. So there's an enormous maturity phase for humans. You're born and you don't walk until what, 2, 3? Anyway,
that sounds like most S&OP processes.
Well, that is my point. So again, we don't need to use the words precocial and altricial, but are you on board with the idea that the kind of pivot that you would advocate is predicated on any kind of maturity, or is it something that can just be done quickly?
I'm very business-wise. I'm extremely skeptical of anything that reeks of incrementalism. That's a term that I use with a pejoratory tones. Most of the pivots, it's always a giant leap into the unknown. You do not incrementally become like your target. You do not incrementally become an e-commerce player. Either you do or you don't. Nokia did not incrementally become a phone manufacturer. They were doing paper, and at some point they were doing smartphones. If you think of that, there is like a path where step by step they did that. It is just same thing with even Apple. They didn't become incrementally a phone manufacturer either. It is. I think that's a very, I would say, dangerous mistake, because it gives this sort of fallacy of, you have to learn to walk before running and whatnot. That works for human and sports. That does not work for businesses. And if we go back to, for example, to your strategy. So I was looking at, contingencies not being discussed. That was an example of that. But what would be a very, I would say, end game sort of strategic production? If you want to, that would represent, the highest sort of maturity. One public and super well-known example is a document, 20-page document called A Testament of a Furniture Dealer, which was written in 1970 by Ingvar Kamprad, the founder of IKEA. This document is a 20-page strategic brief that 50 years later is still of prime relevance. I read it. It's incredible. This thing is incredibly visionary. 50 years later, it is still incredibly relevant for IKEA. Wow. And the magic is that it's even half of it is even relevant for my software company, which has nothing to do with IKEA. So, I mean, it's a testament of how good the document is if half of it is relevant for a company that is in no shape and form even closely relevant to IKEA. But for IKEA, it is still 50 years onward, completely relevant. Now, and this is beautifully written, extremely, I would say, insightful and short and concise. Again, I have never seen a committee produce these sort of things. I have seen over and over people producing strategic brief of very high quality. This one is a historical landmark in a way. There was plenty, for example, Jeff Bezos sending a memo in 2002 saying that everybody had 2 weeks to have a plan to go for API first. The other managers would be fired. That is also this sort of super important strategic brief that explained a lot of the success of Amazon that followed. But my take is that, again, I've never seen committees especially mature one, produce this sort of super high quality documents. Usually they produce insipid soup. They produce a document that is what I call corporate happy talk. Where you just make everybody happy. You just every sentence you say, oh, we should consider that, but we should also consider the opposite. It will only be like super mild temperature for everything. There will be no radical conclusion. Nobody will ever be threatened to be fired in one of those strategic memos. There will not be, I would say, super direct blame assignment and saying this person is to blame, this person needs to basically be fired, and maybe with litigation as a double down, because there was literally it was fraudulent negligence, and yet sometimes it is literally the most I would say honest strategic diagnosis there is. So you see, my take is again, because when I look at S&OP, what are the deliverable produced by those committees? Because that's what those meetings look like, 10 people or more. And do they produce deliverable that are really, really, good, and sometimes to the point of becoming historical landmark? And I really mean it. Do you have a chance out of those committees to produce a document that is so good that 50 years from now, historians will look at it and say, this was a time where this company made the real strategic inflection that just ended up in doing 100-fold on their corporate value, just like, let's say, Apple, before iPhone, after iPhone.
Sorry, Eric, I'll come to you in a moment, but I just want to clarify. Are you identifying, Joannes, just so I understand, and presumably the audience as well, are you saying that if a given meeting doesn't yield a new Bible or new verse,
no.
then it's a waste of time. No, I don't want to misrepresent it.
I say if this class of meetings never does, okay, it is a problem. If it never does. On average, obviously, I'm pretty sure that on average, the average memo produced by Steve Jobs was so.
It wasn't batting 1,000. Yeah.
So I'm not referring to the average. I'm just saying that if you want to look if a process can produce greatness, you would look at least at the sort of, do you have an example of greatness to be found in the past? I can find tons, yes, I can find literally tons of great strategic memos, especially I love, Silicon Valley, people are very open, the memos are leaked probably intentionally.
Probably,
but
yes.
I would say once a week, there is a company from the US where there is a memo, strategic memo that is leaked, and I think, damn, this is good. This is really, I wish as a CEO being able to, produce this sort of super keen, concise, well-written strategic insights and bring all my company on board. I have attended dozens of S&OP processes, which turns out probably over 100 meetings. I have never seen anything remotely close to emerge from that. On average, the average output in terms of deliverable is just, as I said, super bland.
Eric, if I may follow, but also if I could just say, because that is, to be fair, that is your casual observation.
Eric, I don't have statistics on 1,000 of companies.
You're also a consultant, Eric. Feel free to reference your own experience as a consultant as well, please.
First, I would agree. The average is bland. I would agree there. 50% of the organizations, I said almost probably 2/3 in some cases, are bland. You do have the exceptions. It may not raise to the level of the paper that's going to live for 50 years as the ideal strategy for most organizations, but you do get, as far as discussions, as far as M&A, as far as acquisitions, and there was a large CPG company that made the decision to pretty much let go over 100 of their planners to be able to almost go lights out type planning because they integrated AI and being able to facilitate the demand aspect. They let go over 100 planners out of the decisions that were made in an S&OP process. So there are those tough decisions that are made, but most of the decisions, I said, even the average ones for the more mature aren't raising to the level you're discussing. It's more to the level of I said, acquisitions. It's new markets. It's those type of strategies that are really being defined. Brand, which, where we're going to be, what kind of player we're going to, how we're going to position ourselves in the market. Those type of strategies are what we see discussed.
I agree with those being discussed. I agree with that. But also, I see that, in fact, the decision has been made beforehand with a smaller number of people. And where my counter proposition is that I see, and that's where I see, an anti-pattern, is that the meeting is a way to dilute the responsibility of the decision. So you see, there were like 2 or 3 people who were really championing something, but big bureaucracy, big company, big that. So they have this meeting. A lot of people in the meeting are poorly informed, not really following, checking their phone during the meeting and whatnot. And then the decision is acted together because, in fact, there are 3 people that are really pushing for it and the rest basically don't care. And now the problem what I see is that due to the fact that this meeting took place and that the decision was kind of acknowledged in the meeting, we have this big dilution of responsibility where instead of having one name to back this decision, we have 10 or possibly 20. And that's why I say I'm very not convinced that it is that those meetings, which is one of the main characteristic features of S&OP as it is practiced by most companies. It's a scheduled series of large meetings, that this does really contribute in making better decisions. You see, because I've seen when there is a strategic decision, it is made beforehand, and then what comes out of the meeting is just a dilution of responsibility. So it's the same decision, but not made better, but made worse by just now having this fog of opacity on who is truly accountable for that.
To be fair, Eric, just to point out that in the same section, efficient decision making of your book, you do identify defining decision ownership as a characteristic of efficient decision making. So perhaps you could elaborate on that with reference to the challenge that Joannes has just mentioned.
Yeah, because the better you define roles and responsibilities, I understand what I'm bringing to the committees, the meetings, the better I understand what I'm getting out of it. The better I can define roles and responsibilities, the more efficient the meetings and decision-making process is. So that's what I was referring to. And for someone, what you just talked on, I don't know. Because I can see there are generally individuals there, from my experience, that are driving the biggest part of the decision. Is it diluting? I'm not sure. What I have seen is consensus actually creates more accountability. When you have individual plans, individual decisions that people are driving, you actually end up with less accountability because something goes wrong, you end up with the finger pointing. They didn't tell me that, they didn't tell me that. That's generally what I've seen in most organizations. Consensus, that one number attitude that comes out of facilitated out of these reviews and out of these committees, actually I've seen builds more as far as accountability because people now are on board. You have the drivers, but now we all have a consensus of, we're going to see that. So what you end up with is actually more accountability opposed to less that come out of that. So that's typically what I see. The other thing that those reviews are going to facilitate then is enables the better communication. Companies have issues with communication. These reviews help facilitate that communication because not only do you have the driver, but you have the approval, but now you have the consulted and the informed part of the meeting as well. And that's really what you make up as the committee. You have the driver. That's your responsibility. I'm bringing this, I'm driving this decision. I have the approval because sometimes that same person is not the person that needs to approve the decision. So you have the approval there as well. You have the consulted because I need to have my voice heard before we finalize this decision or strategy we're going to do. But you also have the informed. It helps facilitate the communication so they understand what is being done and how it impacts them as well. So that really is what makes up that committee.
Well, again, thank you, Eric. And that touches on a point that I did actually want to transition into, which is more of the actual specific claims. So that's a nice transition because, Joannes, you previously said, and some of these are quotes, some of these are paraphrases, but S&OP is inefficient by design, as it as it relies on information flowing through people, essentially communication, as Eric was just describing. And you've referred to this as an obsolete way to transmit information in a modern company. So 2 questions. One, can you expand on what you mean by that? And when you do so, please clarify, what classes of information are you referring to?
So, the information I'm referring to is ultimately all the transactional information. Because first, let's say there is no greater source of information about the company but its transactional history. And if you look at information as according to the information theory, which is relatively modern things, but it can be quantified. So you can quantify the amount of information you have, just like you can quantify how many kilograms you have of something. If we look in terms of mass of information, I would say the transactional information represents 99.9% of the information that you have about a company. So that is like massive. And again, what sort of companies? I'm not talking about a bakery that operate with one owner and 3 products and whatnot. I'm talking of, a $1 billion plus company that has
scale.
a spanning supply chain with many sites, many products, many people. So we are talking of something that operate at scale, not mega scale, not but large. So that is the I would say the information is really there. Now, you see, this is, and the thing is that whatever opinion people may have and whatever extra insight they have about the state of the company, it is just a small fraction of this information. And the thing is, the software we have don't have nowadays the capacity to make really, really elaborate general intelligence analysis of that. So what we have is the possibility to write, I would say, special purpose numerical recipes to solve narrow problems, such as, for example, controlling inventory replenishment, having like a completely different viewpoint on how I should even think about my sales data. It is still beyond the realm of what we can do with software. So my take is, if we want to think of, this flow of information and organizing the flow in the company in a modern way, is to acknowledge that the information is in a digital form for the quasi-totality of it. That there is no point in having people really involved with the fine print of that. It's just going to flow. And the people are only going to touch this information indirectly through whole layers of numerical recipes. Some numerical recipe generate decisions, some numerical recipe may generate reports, some numerical recipe may generate all sort of instruments that might be needed for human. But you see, there is a mediation. You do not get in touch. I mean, it is technically possible to look at the receipt one by one, the lines, but it's pointless. Again, at the scale, it's just pointless. So what I say is that a modern view that takes, and that's what I advocate, that is more like I would say software-centric, would say we need to embrace the fact that this flow of information is going to flow through software instruments that are of our own making. So it's not those software instruments do not fall from the sky. It falls because people have been thinking about exactly what sort of software instruments and why and how they are made up and all sorts of things. And if we meet together, you should not even be allowed to say, oh, I wasn't aware that this product, their sales are spiking. This information is available to everybody. So if you don't know, you're not paying attention. It is not the role of another department to take your hand so that you look at the data that is available to everybody. So everybody has access to pretty much all the data of the company. That was, by the way, the point of the memo of Bezos in 2002, where say API all over the place. It was just that. Bezos was saying all the data of Amazon should be available to all the other people at Amazon, period. That was what he was saying. And now, your only responsibility when you're part of a division is to make sure there is no, I would say, data that you just keep to yourself to magnify your political power inside the company. And so Bezos say anybody who is playing this game is going to be fired within 2 weeks. So very good. Now you have a landscape where the data is, available. Obviously, plenty of problems. It's not necessarily clean data. It's not necessarily complete data. It's not necessarily, there can be all sorts of problems. It making it accessible is just the start. But now it means that if people have to meet, and I would go back to, I believe that there might be situations where people have to meet, it is to discuss not any kind of decision making, but it is just to improve the general understanding that they have about the company, but not necessarily to have any decisions coming out of it. That's a very, very different point about meeting. So the meeting, if there is a meeting, it is literally just to gain understanding about the rest of the company, and then people will make their own decisions, just more informed on their own. But the meeting is not I would say, burdened with the idea that there should be any kind of deliverable. It may sound strange, but in my experience, when you reach committee level, it is best if this thing is kept with a limited number of hours and the format is let very freeform, so that things that have to flow, information-wise, flow as unimpeded as possible. And then when people are away from the meeting, they can just then take their own responsibility and decide what they were going to decide pretty much anyway. But this time, they don't have the excuse of the committee to delay, postpone, dilute the responsibility or whatever.
Okay. Well, Eric, I do want to give you quite an opportunity there to respond, but I just want to, there was a lot there. So I just kind of want to identify a few key points maybe for response. And again, a yes or no is sufficient. It sounded like you made the claim that software, like a more software-centric approach, would account for basically 99.9% of information flow within a company.
It's already the case. It is already the case, de facto.
That's a yes.
No, in no meetings, people start to just, because the interesting thing, I've read, some historical documents about the emergence. For example, there is a fantastic book called Man and Volt, and they discuss genesis, the emergence of the General Electric. Very, very interesting. And you can see that at the end of the 19th century, people had no choice. They would literally read aloud in a meeting how much we sold doing this and that and that, and that would take hours and hours just to review. But at the time, they would have something like 150 products, and that would take them days to just go manually, because there was no other option. You had to literally read aloud and share the paper. It was the pre-digital age. Nowadays, a company like General Electric is not having 150 products. They probably have 150,000 products, if not 500,000. So we are way past the stage where this information can even go through a human mind. It is incomprehensibly large. And so it has already been the case, whether people acknowledge it or not.
Okay. So that's a yes, thank you. And the second point was S&OP, it's fine. S&OP essentially presents an opportunity to magnify political authority within an organization. An element of it presents people with opportunities to magnify, signal their position.
And magnify, that's something that will just foster more bureaucracy. Okay. A bureaucracy just creates more of its own. It's very difficult to contain. That's also another of the Parkinson's law, is that bureaucracies always grow. No matter, Salesforce will only grow if people are selling more. Factories will only grow if they need to produce more. But bureaucracies inside a company, they will grow no matter what, even if the business is shrinking.
That part I agree with. See, I agree with that statement. Now, to his first point, his yes answer, he has me for about 90% of what he was talking about there. And I'm actually going to give a story to help support what he said. But the other part, it's interesting what you were saying as far as, the purpose you see of meetings, of committees. And it's interesting, and I'll take that and kind of consider that going forward. I see other uses for it. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The first part of what you said, I said I agreed 90% of what you're there and give you a story to actually support. This is a story that is in my book. So if anybody wants to get my book and get it, and you can read it for yourself. But it's actually in the Vanguard section, talking about where S&OP is going and how AI, data, information, exactly what you're talking about, how you can utilize that to enable a better S&OP process. It came from a woman named Corinne. She gave this story. So it's in a boardroom, executive S&OP. They were using some type of generative AI, using internal and some external data to be able to put into their systems. In an executive S&OP, the executive asked a question: what should we do? It was a lot of, the executives around the room put it into the system. The system gave out a response saying, here's your options, here's what I would do, here's why I would do this. The executive looked around the room to the other people in the room. They just kind of looked at each other. He says, okay, we're going to do that. Came out of the room, interviewed that CEO. We asked him, do you think that is the best solution? He was like, I don't know. So then the follow-up question was, why did you go with that? He says, well, number one, it spoke my language. It was able to speak the language that I understood as an executive and operational, and it gave me a solution that made sense. He said, secondly, he said, it had my attention. Generally, what I would do in these meetings was I would ask these questions, and we have a lot of smart people making a lot of money around this table. They would go out of the room, do things, come back hours or day later, and here's what we should do. By then, I'm already on 2 or 3 problems later. It had my attention. And that is really what the key is, I think, what you're talking about. When it comes to synthesizing information, processing the vast amount of information that's available, to make decisions in almost real time that to meet the speed of business, we need to be able to enable systems, technology to be able to do that for us, even in the boardrooms. I'm seeing a definite need for that. And we have use cases for that. And I say that I highlight one of them in the book as well. So I definitely see what you're talking about. Now, the other one you're saying is if we go to that, then it's just a report out, or it's just an information flow, or being able to level set everybody on here's where what we're going, so they can make their individual decisions. And that's an interesting concept. And I said I will consider that. But what I've seen as far as the mature organizations, they have generally 3 aspects to a mature meeting that's an efficient type meeting. Number one is, hey, here's what everybody's decided, the decisions that we're pushing. And it's kind of a head nod to that of, yeah, consensus, everyone's agreed, that's where we're going to go. So that's exactly what you're talking about. Whether it's system driven, whether it's people driven, that's the first part. The second part is they're not always agreement. There is some things that need to rise. Even the systems or people cannot make the decision. We do need committee to really look at that aspect. So there are the exception-based decision-making that is very part. You're not making every decision. It's an exception-based decision-making. And I see that maintaining even in the world that we're going to, that we both kind of agree that it's migrating to. The third piece is then being able to articulate any changes that need to be to the strategy going forward. Hey, it could be something as simple as we need to be more cash focused because we have these covenants and we see this downturn in the economy. So I know the strategies were this, but we kind of need to be more cash focused in our strategies going forward. So consider that with the decision. That are going to either be fed into people now or systems later. So it's the changes. So the 3 aspects is here's our plan. Yeah. Here's the exception-based decisions that we need to make, and here's the changes we need to make. Now, whether those decisions are driven by systems and technology, or those systems are driven by people right now, that I will concede on. But I think the other 2 parts, that is still a people aspect.
Well, thank you. If I can follow up, and I will come to you, Joannes, in a moment. But something there, so I wrote down the 3 points you made. Again, I paraphrase, but 1, consensus; 2, essentially conflict resolution; and 3, articulating changes to strategies. And that's an interesting point, and something I was going to come to later, but that's a nice transition to something that Joannes had said, but I'll ask you first, Eric. So previously, Joannes had made a claim that S&OP plans are ineffective given how slowly they are refreshed or revised. So for example, people might only meet once a month, or for some strategies, once a quarter. So then this makes them the processes, ineffective in fast-paced business environments where conditions can change at a moment's notice. So my question back to you, and then Joannes, I'll ask you the same question. With what you just described, I understand steps 1 and 2, let's just concede them for discussion, but steps 3, if you're articulating changes to strategies once a month or like 10 to 12 times a year, how effective is that where things can, like a container ship flips over in the Suez Canal. We need that decision today. We need to know what we're doing now. We can't wait another 3.5 weeks. Eric's on vacation. It's a holiday for us. Like, no. What do we do now?
I think it goes back to what he was talking about. Even if we have a system, or we have capabilities of creating, here's the information, here's what we should do, then individuals make decisions. It's no different. When you're looking at a strategy, shouldn't be changing every day with the nuances of a port strike or something that's happening in some other region that's impacting you. Those are individual decisions that either people or systems should be able to make. Those are either operational or management type of decisions. Where S&OP operates most efficiently is in the planning hierarchy, where you're at the extended planning horizon, where decisions can be made, not just trade-offs, where you're making business decisions at extended planning horizons. Those shouldn't change daily. Those really are driven by longer term strategies of our organization. We have a cash strategy. We have a customer intimacy strategy. What is our strategies of our organization that really drive those extended planning horizon type decisions? So that's where we operate. During COVID, we saw exactly, there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of uncertainty what happened. And over 60% of the companies that we researched went to some type of weekly war room type mentality with executives in these war rooms because things were changing so quickly and they were trying to keep ahead of it. But what they discovered was, Lori, that was inefficient. To your point, you couldn't change that quickly. So most of those organizations went back to the monthly cycles with the S&OP. Now, a lot of them maintained a weekly cycle, S&OE, master planning. And if we want to talk about automating that, I'm all for that. That's the management hierarchy. That is the decisions that should be made. When you have the new information that is presented, that's synthesized, those are the information you shouldn't do by committee. I would agree with that. But they maintained a lot of those companies maintained an S&OE or master planning. But most of those companies went back to a monthly cycle because that's where they found the efficiencies of, hey, we still have a strategy. We still need to maintain what our strategy is and then execute those or manage those strategies, in essence, what we do on a week-to-week basis.
Well, thank you, Eric. And Joannes, same question.
So, you see, if I have to bounce back on what was presented, I think, where there is a subtle, different perspective is that I don't even approach the decisions the same way. Just to give an example on how it's done traditionally and how with Lokad does it, for example. We were discussing about the cost of money. So we have a meeting discussion, should we, reduce our working capital or can we allow to expand? That would be, sort of decision that happens traditionally in this sort of committees. Lokad takes a radically different approach. We just say there is a cost of money economical variables. And in the decision that Lokad generates for inventory replenishment, production order, this is one of the many economic drivers that is implicitly coded there. So that means that whenever these variables, increase, all the decisions that are generated automatically immediately reflect the new reality of this economic variable. It's something that is taken as an input. If we decide that finance is going to be in charge of maintaining this value, they can change the cost of money every single day, and all the decisions that are generated on the same day reflect that. They don't even need to talk to production to get the effect of that. They don't need to talk to people who are of purchasing to get the effect of that. It is the synchronization is mediated through the software. They don't need to go and talk about that. There will be only once a talk on the fact that we have to have an agreement that cost of money is an economic drivers that is company-wide and need to be acknowledged by all. Yes, once. But once you have that, then that means that there is classes of discussion that are not there. And then suddenly, if finance decide to bump the cost of money up or down, it is on them and them alone. The other people say, it's your rule. If you tell us that any dollar we spend comes as if we were borrowing at a 20% interest rate, that is you who are setting that for that. Don't then complain that we have stock out, because if you assume that anything that is under the form of inventory is burning like crazy, then yes, we are going to sacrifice inventory. That's just a natural consequence of your economic assumption. Feel free to revise that any way you want, as frequently as you want. But you see, that's the thing, is that, and the way we see that is that the vast majority of things that are discussed can in fact be isolated once as an economic driver of some kind. And then every department is on its own, controlling those, I would say, strategic variables. And you don't need to meet to discuss that again. So you see, the software just remove the quasi-totality of need to have people meeting to discuss those things, because the synchronization, the coordination happens through the software layer without the need to people to just shake hands and whatnot. You see, and that's and then you get something that is it is not exactly real time, but it is like super low latency, like minutes, and that's just fine. You see a little bit where I think there is this different vision, is that most of those committees are just stuck in with a perception that tons of things have to flow through humans, while if you do it slightly more carefully, you just remove the need to discuss those things in the first place.
When you're looking at decisions, you're talking about like the cost of money, and if we hold this inventory, here's what's going to cost me if I have this inventory in place. We get into going into a recession. And we understand that interest rates are going to go, cost of borrowing money is going to increase. So, okay, what are we going to do with the cost of money? But we have the flip side of, we now have the capability of, do we want to gain market share during this time? Because we think there's pent-up demand and we can have the potential to be able to gain market share. Now we have a decision. So we can actually go ahead, create the inventory, make sure we have a customer intimacy type of strategy to be able to maintain, to increase our market share. So then when we come out, we're positioned into the market. Or we can say, no, we need to be able to protect our cash. We're going to look at, be able to, because of margin, we have different things. When you're looking at, bronze, triangle, it's not a, all of the above. It's an either or a lot of times. When you get to those either or type of questions, that's where you're going to have a person or committee type to help drive that. That's what you always see out of these meetings. Because then, absolutely, cost of money, those are factors you put in. You allow the system to do the math. You allow the system to really it's smarter than you are a lot of times. It's more efficient. It's quicker. But what are we going to really drive to? That becomes the strategy piece.
That's where, again, I disagree. Let's take to the example you've given of market share. The way we do it, we say, $1 that you get from a new client is worth more than $1 from an old client. That's it.
Please unpack that.
Sorry?
Please unpack that, what you just
yes,
said. Because I know what you mean, but others will not.
So if you introduce, an economic variable that says $1 from a new client is worth more than just $1 from an existing client, what you're effectively steering your decision-making processes into whatever you can do to make those new clients emerge. And when they do, they will have, extra dollars attached to them. Because and that's a way to just modelize the fact that you're investing to get extra market share. And that's fine. But you see, the way you can super concisely wrap everything into just how much is worth $1, what is the extra, the bonus that $1 of a new client brings for which period. And that's it. And you see, that's the thing where people say you have to either or. I say, no. When you have economic drivers, you can have a driver for the cost of money, one driver for the value of new clients. And you have like those drivers. Different departments can steer those drivers in different ways. Independently, they don't even need to talk to each other. And the resulting decision that you have is just the balance of all those drivers, cost and rewards. And again, you just remove, including for a push to actually expand your market share, that do not require people talking to each other on every single detail. You see, that's the thing. That's exactly the sort of things that I say. People spend their time discussing things they should not even be discussing. If they have the right setup with those economic drivers, then it becomes people can take ownership on saying exactly how much is worth. And when you say that $1 of revenue of a new client is worth more than $1, it is not virtual. It means that marketing will actually spend this money somehow or through other functions. And it means that you will have an extra cost that will be incurred because you will have earned, let's say, $50 million of extra revenues. But in order to do that, you will have generate $20 extra million of various costs. So you see, the interesting thing is that you only need to have the economic drivers. The fine print of those extra 20 million invested to gain those clients is going to be ventilated across potentially millions of decisions. And you don't really care. You see, you only have the understanding of the structure of how the mechanic will play out. You don't need to go into every single line to see exactly what is happening. You see a little bit where the difference, and I believe that's really my frustration, that most of those discussions, I've attended those committees, they're discussing things that with a proper setup, when I say proper setup, I mean modern software setup to drive those sort of decisions. It's mostly they're talking of things that they would not even need categorically to discuss. That would be taken care of. So it's a big waste of time, you know.
Eric, there's a lot there to cover, so please, your response.
I think it goes back to an earlier part of our discussion we had that I really didn't touch on then, because I talked about maturity and journey, and you said that you're opposed to anything that's incremental, but that is truly what we see in an S&OP process. My whole book is really built out as a journey that organizations come. I've went through the journey with organizations. Countless companies I've worked with that have seen through this journey. It truly is an incremental process. And we layered and we've measured companies as far as where they are in the maturity. We can quantify where they are in that journey then as well. And we can see measurable results as they go through the journey. So I truly think there is an incrementality of this process. There is a journey of this process. To that point, then, I said 60% of the companies out there, and you see a lot of other research that shows the same exact thing. 60% of the companies out there, I agree. They are doing things that would seem, as far as inefficient or, you can do otherwise in the meetings that they are doing, but they don't have the enablers. They don't have other processes. So they're using this as an enabler to those decisions that do need to be made. So as they go through the journey, they're either filling a gap or they are now, going through a journey, and this is part of that incremental improvement to get to a place where they can be more strategic and they are looking at things more, as far as more efficient and the right things in the meetings in the future.
Well, thank you, Eric. And to follow up on that point, and again, just push this along a little bit. You talk, some of the words you've used there, that the S&OP process is, in fact, a journey. It's a maturity process. That there is a degree of incremental growth. Let's just say that for a moment. Again, we've covered that, so let's not go backwards. But going forwards, I am curious to talk about, or to tie together what you just said about incrementalism and your discussion about cost, and talk about something you said before, which is the potential opportunity cost of S&OP. So previously, Joannes, you talked about, obviously, supply chain decision automation, how that is basically the only way for supply chains to survive and for companies to thrive. And S&OP is an opportunity cost in that regard. So in what way, assuming that you still think that, in what way, please delineate the opportunity costs of the incremental S&OP maturity process that Eric is discussing.
The problem with S&OP is that the top level management of a company can't be chasing, an endless number of projects, of initiative, of stuff. So they have to basically focus. I mean, out of necessity, they can't really chase more than maybe a few dozen priorities, and that's it. There was this old joke about Microsoft, which was focus on everything, but the reality is that it's very, very difficult for a management team to push maybe more than 24 initiatives. Now, which means that S&OP is going to consume one of those slots. That's my point. And in terms of, and what I say is that despite the fact that the alternative to S&OP that I propose is a massive reduction in terms of white collar workforce, because the alternative that I propose just mechanize the hell out of it. The mechanization, the savings in terms of workforce is just the tip of the iceberg. The real benefit is to have like a superior version of supply chain for your company, and also a superior version of what strategy means in a digital first sort of environment. That's what I'm saying. And here I see those meetings as a little bit of the antithesis of that, because they are not, you see, those things like S&OPs, they have been around for decades. They will not be 10x better a decade from now. They are fundamentally limited by what people can achieve. I think the sort of practices are mature, or they're known. They are not like revolutionary. There is no, and just contradict me if you think I am misrepresenting what is presented. But I would say nowadays my take, after read several books about S&OP, is that there is a general consensus with various flavors on how it's done. It is not radically different. It is more a matter of preferences. And whatever benefits we can expect, they are unfortunately relatively capped. It is not, the best S&OP is not going to produce the next SpaceX. It's not going to produce the next Amazon. Those things will have like very, I would say, capped sort of returns. And I said the opportunity cost by going into an alternative paradigm that is very much software driven is that is the thing that can give you the 10x. That is something where you can do with 2 people what otherwise takes 1,000 people, and then have a reactivity that is like you react the next day instead of reacting the next month. And I know that, for example, S&OPs, just being able to react from one week to the next has been on the agenda of all companies for, as far as I know, at least 2 decades. They have never gone that. And so they are still stuck, and many companies are stuck with actually quarterly plans, and they can't even go to the monthly one. And they have been stuck for, again, 1-2 decades at that. So you see, I see, so that's I see that the alternatives, which are credible because it's possible to make them work, just give you things that we already know S&OP will never get there. In terms of reactiveness, in terms of capacity to deal with unlimited amount of information, the ability to just take advantage of all the nice goodies from computer science, from LLMs and whatnot. That's my point. And the point is that this opportunity cost is massive. And by pursuing this classic S&OP, you're just preventing yourself from making true breakthrough into the alternative options. That's the essence of the case when I said the opportunity costs are dwarfing the saving that you can have by just reducing the manpower.
So Eric, again, just to summarize that for everyone, the direct and the indirect costs of the process. So the direct costs, what it actually costs in terms of salary, the indirect cost, time, effort, what you could have done with everything else. So your response.
So looking at the cost, that we can quantify. We have quantified. Matter of fact, it's in the book. I actually talk about what are the real costs of implementing an S&OP. What are the measurable benefits of an S&OP, the ROI. It's actually part of the book that I have. So we can quantify it. We've done research on this. In IBF, we looked at about 23 different attributes as far as, the structure, cadence, who's involved, the, level of aggregation, the time horizon, the planning horizon. We look at different common, what you talked about, people call it different things, but what are the standard elements of a S&OP process? We measure those, the consistency of those, and we also look at how are our companies performing as they go through the journey. And what we found is we can now bucket people in 4 broad categories: emerging, just starting out; essential, those are like the first half; next level, above 50%; and then vanguard, the top 15%. And what we found is that next level and above, companies will outperform. Bottom line, 2 to 3% improvement is what they see through the S&OP journey. That is real money for organizations. 1% to 2% top line growth. They see a reduction in the uncertainty, whether it be forecast or other types of supply uncertainty, be able to reduce those by 15 points. We see margin improvement. We see cash improvement of inventory. So across the board, they see measurable results, 2% to 3% to the bottom line for next level and above. There is real cost. And full disclosure, most emergings, it's costing them money to do it. Most essentials, they're getting minimum, if any, benefit when you're at that essential level, which is half the companies out there. So I fully agree, half the companies out there are not getting benefit from an S&OP process. But what we see companies that go through the journey, there's typically about an 18-month to 24-month ROI on the initial investment. If you go through the process where they start reaching those next level and they start seeing the benefits from it, you do actually see a return on your investment. And I have countless use cases to be able to actually show that.
So just to clarify, I don't want to misrepresent that. Did you say 50% of companies currently do not benefit from their S&OP processes?
15% definitely do not, but then there's a large majority of the other 35% in there that don't as well. A lot of when you get that emerging essential, a lot of companies they're breaking even at best.
Joannes, does that align? Thank you. Does that align with your sentiments?
My sentiment again is that it's. I'm going to be much more pessimistic because again the problem is that, you see, when you tell me about ROI, let's go back to this old analogy of horses versus cars. Yes, you can improve your horse, by caring for it, by having a better horse saddle, and etc. That's the problem with those incremental improvement. They are real, but the opportunity cost is so large. You see, that's people who are doing. Look, we have improved the saddle for the horse, and we get a 5% improvement on what we can carry on the horse, or the horse is less tired, less prone to injury and whatnot. This is real. But you have an automotive on the side, and this is the thing that is like game changing. And you see, people have a hard time to understand, but just imagine, as a quick anecdote I already mentioned on this channel, but during the lockdowns, one of our clients who had over a billion, large European company, $1 billion worth of inventory, we have 900 users for them, and all of those people went on vacation paid by the state, because Europeans, states were very generous, paying people to stay at home and not work for 14 months. So we had people that were staying at home for 14 months they were prohibited to work because it was not about, otherwise the state would not provide subsidies for those people staying at home. It was so if you were staying at home, you could not work remotely. You had to be really, really on vacation. Excellent. And then so we ended up in a situation with automation. We ended up with a team of 3 people on the side of Lokad, 5 people on the side of the client instead of the 900, to make again €1 billion plus inventory with all the manufacturing flow on top of that, still work for 14 months. You see, I see that as the order of magnitude of change is just enormous. And the idea that you should be chasing a few extra percent where you're not even sure that you're breaking even, it is, for me, it's not the right level of ambition. Similarly, we had another client that, due to the lockdown, literally it was fashion company, they literally went under the equivalent for the international audience of Chapter 11. So they went 2020, went under Chapter 11. And then when they got out, we had robotized several of their functions, and they were down to 90% of their workforce. So, and you see, that really changed the way you operate. And you can do more. Again, if you want to have an example of what a 90% workforce reduction look at Twitter. In the year that followed, those 90% reduction, Twitter introduced videos. They introduced half a dozen of features that had been missing for over a decade because they reduced their workforce of software engineer by 90%. And there is really a causality. I don't think that people realize how toxic it is to have too many people on some problems. And I see that, on the contrary, my deep belief is that, on the contrary, the question is that, can you have one person that can do as much as 10% prior. And if you can do that, the result have no counter, I would say, observation in my experience. If you can achieve that, you will get things that are incredibly good out of that. Not just good in saving that you could do with the 10 people, but you will also have something that is of a better quality overall. It's a very strange thing, is that suddenly you have more freedom, more reactivity, less bureaucracy, it is simpler, etc., etc. So again, that is a little bit my take on that. And yes, you can have improvements, but you're passing on this kind of massive opportunity cost, which is what about reimagine your company with 10 times less white collars.
Okay. When you're looking at the opportunity cost, I mentioned earlier a large CPG company located in the States that went through a process and said, hey, we're actually going to eliminate over 100 of our planners. We don't need them. We can actually drive that by system. And they understood going into that decision that their precision most likely would have been lower. But the cost of all those people, hey, net, it's going to be a benefit to the organization. They are now hiring most of those back. It was millions of dollars they ended up losing because of that precision, not having the people. Now, not to say they didn't implement some things correctly. Technology's not there yet to do a lights out planning for that type of organization or most organizations yet. So we're not there yet. But right now, the realities we deal with today, a large company tried to do that and didn't find those opportunity costs. They're hiring the planners back in now is what they're doing because they wasn't ready for it and technology wasn't ready at the current point. Right now, less than 3% of all AI projects actually get implemented. There's use cases for them. Countless use cases. I talk to people who, this works. I can show you how this works, but companies aren't implementing and aren't doing it yet. So that's the reality we deal with right now. The other realities we have to deal with right now, because I'm not saying we have this utopia we may be able to get to, but the realities we deal with right now is IBF research, 42% of companies Excel as their primary operating system and planning system. They're not going to make the leap right now to where we need to go. I know you don't like the word incremental, but you can't tomorrow saying, here's this AI, we're going to start doing this. They're going to have to transition to it. The other thing we're looking at is right now, S&OP is $1 billion operation. I'm working with Microsoft right now, early this week. They're developing out their S&OP processes. Coca-Cola, P&G, the large organizations, they have established and are investing more and more. Right, every year we see it used to be 15% of companies that were adopting S&OP. Now that number is now post-COVID over 20%. So more companies post-COVID are now adapting more S&OP processes now as well. So it's a growing market. So not only is it billion, it's growing. So the realities we're doing right now, it is a process. Whether it's filling a gap right now, or it is the benefits that we see of 2 to 3% to the bottom line, and those are real value going forward for mature organizations. Whatever it may be, it is viable right now, and within the next years, we're not going to be at a place where we're going to be able to eliminate it.
Thank you, because you presented a perfect segue that I have ruined by acknowledging. And it's the question I've been waiting to get to, which is, Joannes, you've made the claim historically that companies can eliminate S&OP without negative consequences and should simply focus on improving data flow through software. And to quote you now, I have met some large companies that decided to just terminate their S&OP division entirely. Nothing bad happened. So now, Eric has just mentioned Microsoft. They have some dollars. They're pretty big. If they were to eliminate the S&OP process tonight, you're telling me nothing bad would happen?
Microsoft is such a weird company in many ways. Brilliant. It has it has a profitability that is almost like unprecedented in history. It is probably the only company outside hard luxury that is having more than 50%, margin, net margin, not gross margin, but net margin. It is a very strange company, and it is super strange in many ways. They produce excellent software, but they're still running SAP, which is a competitor of them for their own ERP. It is bizarre. It is bizarre. So You see, I would not take Microsoft as a reference because it's first it's a software company. 90% of their revenue, probably 95 comes from digital assets that they are selling, not physical assets. They still have a pretty big supply chain with the Xbox and all the Microsoft. So even if it's small, due to Microsoft being so large, it is the assets are probably a $10 billion plus business every year. So it is still a very large company. But
To the underlying point, though.
so nevertheless, I'm very skeptical that it would actually hinder anything at what they're doing. You know, I do not see. I see a lot of the headway of Microsoft, even in the as far hardware is concerned, comes from a very nice innovation, very nicely packaged product, who is usually superior software technologies embedded in them. That's, for example, the Surface they created overnight a $1 billion business. That was something like 5 years ago when they created Surface, the big ones for corporate meetings. So you see, it is the way I see that is that it is not a game where those meetings are really creating the value. I do not see, very superior execution for that. This is more like they have a very extensive range. They have, I would say, decent enough software technologies. I know that people from the Linux camp would be horrified and say that everything that Microsoft produces is pure crap. But I would say, it's good enough. And the equivalent of the stuff on Linux usually just do not exist. Or when it exists, it's not that good. Again, the equivalent of Excel on Linux is just crap.
But again, just to press you a little bit on the overall point
but the overall point,
any other
again,
company of $1 billion or more.
Yeah, again, I did see that, although the conditions were relatively extreme. It was usually where Chapter 11 or quasi Chapter 11 that forced people to do that. But again, I have seen indeed companies hiring back people after firing a lot of people. But they were, you see, in your anecdote, you see they were hiring planners and they were hiring people that were just dealing with the decisions, the daily decisions for inventory and whatnot. That I have seen as well. That's not what I'm describing. I'm not saying that those companies can just eliminate, the people who are actually managing inventory or managing production planning. I'm discussing about eliminating the people who are only focusing on S&OP. So the people who are literally their function is to support those meetings, support those company-wide forecasts, support this process, and that are only doing that. If you suppress someone who is managing on a daily basis the production schedule of the factory, yes, you end up with a very big problem if you don't have like a complete replacement production grade in place.
When you're looking at eliminating it, even the companies that don't have a structured S&OP process, they end up having something. Decisions are going to be made. So they may not call it S&OP. They may decide to call it something. We have lots of acronyms out there. People are, but there is meetings happening, even with organizations. So you don't eliminate the process. You eliminate the structured S&OP process. I'll guarantee you're replacing with something else. Now you're advocating replacing it with, decision support and data flow and information flow. You're advocating, and if they can do that, wonderful. But back to reality, if 42% are in Excel, most organizations don't have the maturity. They're replacing it, a structured process that's proven and has benefits, with something else, is what they end up doing.
Thank you. And just to clarify, Joannes, Eric suggested that you were advocating replacing S&OP with something. Is that? I wasn't entirely sure that's what you were pitching.
But also, you see, I agree with the fact that there will be something else. But my point is that, and that's an illusion, is that structure is not naturally good. It is not by itself, it's not because you have a process in place that you're going to get a good outcome. Sometimes having no process and letting things emerge, just get you the best results. It is, and what I see is that you enforce a lot of rigidity, and it is not really the sort of rigidity that is conducive to get the best results. And there are plenty of industries. For example, let's say if you want to go into things where it's completely obvious, if you want to go into the music industry, you do not get, a fantastically successful song by having a very careful process on how to get from the original idea to the finished product. It's usually extremely messy. Those people live very weird lives, and it tends to produce, the good products. So you see, I say this, I believe that this is rationalism at play. When you want to add structure so that it doesn't look dumb, so that you want to give, a veneer of science by putting things in tight boxes so that it looks under control. But my take is that remove S&OP, let those managers manage their time intelligently. If they don't manage their time intelligently, just fire the people who are just, doing nothing. And those people will, on their own, figure out what really serves them well and what not. And you don't need to have this uniform process across the organization enforcing those meetings. You see, that's, again, I'm not a big believer of those enforced structure that guarantees superior results. And if you look a little bit the pockets of law,
don't worry.
Yeah, I would say with someone who is generally pessimistic, you're all for optimistic that people on their own can figure out how to work and do things. That seems a little optimistic to me. What we found is there is a correlation between a structure and the results that you get. It creates more efficiency, creates better decisions with more structure. Now, I agree. There's a difference between structure and rigid. You don't want to be so rigid that you don't have flexibility to talk about what's needed to be. So you need flexibility, but you can still have structure and flexibility. I think those two can work concurrently.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you, again, an example that comes from my younger brother, who has been working for a very large Danish company. I'm not going to give the name of the company for years, but people can look it up on LinkedIn if they want. And just what S&OP looked like in process, because that was, again, 40,000 employees, large industrial company. He was part of sales. Every single year there would be the S&OP process, so everybody would give their sales forecast. So every entry salesperson would give their forecast. That was like a super tedious exercise that would take 2 weeks to every single person of the sales teams. And then obviously, because they want to exceed expectations, they would lower their targets. Okay, so they would undershoot massively. So then the boss aggregates. So first layer aggregate, and then they see that it's undershoot it's so incredibly low that they will have to retwist the number much higher, but not too high, because otherwise it's just ridiculous. Yeah, they're not going to lose 30% on their market share on every single market that they serve next year. And so they would just rebump the thing up. And then, but still, they want to exceed expectations, so they will still re-steer it down. And then it will go through the layers, and people will repeat this process of aggregating. It's too low, bump it up, but not too high. And you end up with some super, super weird numbers. And though at the end of this process, that was taking months, and that was repeated every quarter, then you will have those sales projections that were complete nonsense. And then people on production were doing the same thing, but they were doing it the other way. They would inflate their numbers so that, because if they project more production, they would get more money to have more production capacity. So that was the opposite process. Complete nonsense, also completely gamed. And then at the very top, then they had like an endless series of committees that would put those numbers one against another. And then at great length, they would finally agree on something. And then people would vote back. Sales would be of agreement of ignoring completely what was agreed upon, because it was just complete nonsense. And production would do the same thing. And you see, that was the sort of things where that is what happens with mature S&OP. And they had like a mature, S&OP that got to its maturity point at least 10 years ago. Maybe you would say it is done wrong, like the very wrong version of that. But my take is that that's the problem with bureaucracy, is that bureaucracy tends to decay. So even if it was something that was done right at the beginning, the general understanding of bureaucracies is that they decay and they decay fast. And it's extremely difficult to prevent a bureaucracy from decaying. So that's my take on that.
What you just, I think you watched one of my podcasts, because I did an entire podcast about exactly what you talked about, especially during budget cycle, people going into this, it costs the company so much money. There's so much waste through exactly what you talked about, because it's utilizing people's resources and time with zero benefit. They're going in not trying to come up with an actual strategy result. They're coming in playing games, and they're going through the cycles of this game playing to come up with what's going to benefit them. And there is absolutely waste of time, waste of effort with not even trying to get a value out of it. I fully agree. And I've seen it. I've seen that exact case that you're talking about in S&OP process, but even outside of S&OP process, I've seen the same thing play out. So I agree. What you described is inefficient and is done. And you said, is it done wrong? Yes, that is not the right way to do things. But what you do see in organizations that do have more mature S&OP process, I mentioned like a Target, mentioned like a Coca-Cola, some of those organizations that they're not going through that budget cycle or that annual cycle that you're talking about. It is actually integrated into the monthly cycle now, and they're no longer trying to, it's all about collaboration, having the right people work together, consensus, driving to that one number attitude. At least people are aligned. And the other key is transparency. There is a transparency process, and that's what really makes that mature organization. When you start trying to game it, when you're trying to do things, to benefit you, then it breaks down quickly. I agree.
I'm just going to push on a little bit from this point, because I believe producers letting me know we've been going for about 90 minutes now. So
but it's fun.
Yeah, it is fun. It is absolutely fun. But I'm sure we all have things to do as well. So, but there is a point that so again, listening to you, Eric, this way, I'm really glad that you came, and thank you for coming. Is one, you're nice to talk to, but secondly, you are quite open-minded and have alluded to many times during the conversation to the future of S&OP. In fact, you touched on it earlier. I think you said the inevitable migration. That might have been the words you used. Again, to automation, to mechanization, to robotization. And so you accused Joannes, not accused, you said that Joannes was very optimistic about what people can do. And I'm curious, how do you hold both of these thoughts in your head simultaneously? That, S&OP, yep, it's great. We need to use that. And are you also optimistic about the future of S&OP, bearing in mind your appreciation of the general trajectory of technology and mechanization? Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm still optimistic. I said because things will fundamentally change. Absolutely. I don't deny that. I mean, I'm going to be in Europe next week talking at a keynote, and that's going to be the essence of what I'm talking about. Things will fundamentally change from where they are. So we can't continue the current process and trajectory we're on and thinking that's going to maintain us going forward. As technology enables more, as we get more capabilities, we will need to fundamentally change and enable new processes and new aspects. So those absolutely will emerge. What those will look like, I'm not fully, understanding. What I project is we're going to go more from, even the strategies are more functional specific strategies where we are right now. We're going to go more to the business side of things, more of a business efficiency opposed to really functional efficiencies. I think we're going to go more there because we have the capability of synthesizing and being able to see how things more interconnect going forward. So I think we're going to have more of those. So those are aspects. The other thing that I've talked about is I think when one thing becomes commoditized, something else becomes a premium. Coding, data, that's going to become more and more commoditized. What's going to become the premium then is the communication, the objectivity that are outside of systems that we need to then start applying. Being able to look at things and question even what the outputs are saying and how to question and what to question and when to question. Those are going to be the skill sets going forward that are going to be incorporated into some type of business efficiency planning or the S&OP of the future. Those are going to be really what it's going to be designed to. But absolutely, I think we're migrating. We definitely see change happening, and I'm not going to be ignorant to that. It's not going to happen over the next years, but we will see it migrate, and we will see a fundamental difference in what we're having in the future.
Thank you. And Joannes, before you respond, I just want to pick up on a certain point that was mentioned there. Eric, you talked about, well, naturally new processes will emerge in time. That's the general trend. But something you said earlier, Joannes, was essentially there's a limit on there's a ceiling on the innovation of human to human communication, or how well information can flow through people. So bearing in mind, you said that, what is your response to what Eric has just said about the future of S&OP?
My take is that when you go through an incremental perspective, you always add. You see, it is fundamentally an additive process. Mm-hmm. And where I see the true disruption and true, leap forward is when you subtract. It's a very abstract sort of way to think about that. But if you want to have a beautiful, beautiful example, look at the three rocket engines, first generation, second, and third, designed by SpaceX. I mean, I invite the audience to have a look. From generation 1 to generation 3, where they stand, the generation 3 is way simpler. Mm. It's literally an order of magnitude less pipes, tubes. The first thing looks like a mad scientist experiment. It has hundreds of tubes. The third generation has something like half a dozen visible tubes. It is the one look like it has this sort of Dyson vacuum cleaner vibe, very elegant, simple. Everything has been removed. The first one was just like mad science experiments with like a steampunk vibe, with so much complication. So you see, my point back to this evolution, I say it would be, I don't know where we are heading. I really don't. I just say that the easy thing that you can think of is just adding. But the true, leap through, the things where you progress massively is when you subtract. So my question is that would be think about long and hard about what will be removed and how from S&OP 2.0, even if it's, even if my take is incorrect, maybe the take would be, it would be S&OP 2.0, not with more, but with less, because it is done smarter, differently, something else.
At this point, I mean, I have nothing further to add. Is there any points that you wish to pose to each other, unmediated by me? Is there anything burning on your mind you want to ask, Joannes?
Well, as far as Joannes, I think we've ended on agreement of neither one fully knows. It may be a simpler version. I'm all on board with that, but it will be a different version going forward. I think we find consensus on that. We built consensus, so we have consensus on that. When you're looking at the future of demand planning, you said 90% can be eliminated. Is your view we can actually eliminate a lot of the people and be able to automate more of business going forward? And if that's the case, how do we deal with the equilibrium of wage versus consumer? Because we still need people to buy things, and businesses buy things, but businesses aren't consumers. How do we balance that going forward?
So here, the take is that I'm very much in agreement with the Schumpeter perspective on economy, which is creative destruction. 200 years ago here in Paris, the jump number one was, and it was a quarter of the population, it was people who were carrying water. That was a quarter of the population. Obviously, running water has eliminated these jobs, and those quarter of the population just didn't die out of starvation because they had no more jobs. Whenever there is something that just mechanized, then those people are liberated into the job market, and the job market finds its way. There is no limit in how much. I have a daughter at school. They have classrooms of 30, sometimes 35 children. I would be very pleased if they had classrooms of 15 children, instead. There is, when you go to the hospital, you have to wait sometimes in Paris for hours because they are short on people. There is no shortage of having more nurse, more school teachers, more everything. So what I do see is companies that operate supply chains where nowadays the white collars exceed the number of blue collars. It's very strange. Mechanization has been working so well that factories are almost empty. And now I have many clients where a factory can be run with 20 people, but you need 100 people doing Excel spreadsheets on the side of the factory to keep the factory running. It's very strange. If we go back a century ago, people would have been completely baffled. They would think, oh, we need 3 engineers for 100 workers. And nowadays, that's the opposite. You have like literally hordes of people doing spreadsheets. I completely agree. Spreadsheets do govern supply chains. And in contrast, blue-collar workforce has been extensively mechanized. So we have all those people who are doing back office jobs. My take is that, yes, for those, I would say, back office clerical jobs, I'm very specific about the sort of job, back office clerical. So it doesn't see people who do not see a client, people who do not see a supplier, people who do not physically do something for the company. Those will most likely, that's my take, 20 years ago be reduced by up to 90%, with software technologies. That will mean millions of people, the market will find its way. Do not think as this sort of dystopian scenarios where those people are just left to starve, having no resource. They will just find their way. And just because there is, again, that's the beauty of general economy, free market, is that there is no limit on how much stuff people want, So if you have like free resources, the market will find its way to just allocate those people to the most paying jobs that will be just different. And those things, and I think that the interesting thing that we concluding thoughts is that it is the first time this is happening to white collars. Digitalization started in the late 70s, never eliminated white collars. We have more white collars than ever. But now I think we live in a society of bubble of white collars where people think it's normal if 90% of the population sits behind a desk instead of doing something physical. I believe it is very strange. It is something that is very much like the first section of 21st century sort of view. It has never been like that. My take is that it could flow back to a different sort of society where we go back to something that is much more balanced, where blue collars, and I say that in a non-pejorative way. I know that in the US you can have plumbers that do up to $150,000 a year. Yeah. Those people are not poor; they are making a very good living. It will just balance back to something where there will be a lot less of those clerical back office bureaucratic sort of jobs. That's just my take for the next 20 years.
Does that satisfy your curiosity?
Semi-satisfying, because I look at it a little bit differently, because I'm not sure this, as far as automating white collar, with we're not mechanizing, we are innovating new forms of decision making and AI. I think it's going to be radically different going forward. That has potential to be different than other types of innovations that we've seen historically. The water, the mechanization of certain tasks and of different processes that people do. So with that, we may need to rethink the way we have workforces. I mean, we can get into philosophical, but we may look at a minimum income type of scenarios, and because businesses are becoming more efficient, they're making more money, and they have a tax base. And there's a lot of ways we can look at it, but I'm not sure that we're going to have the society we have in the future that we had in the past.
But I think countries have been changing a lot, and I think the US is no exception. I mean, the US has evolved tremendously over the last 2 decades.
In 24 hours.
You did see our election a couple days ago, right?
Yeah. We all made the same joke at the same time.
I think expecting change. It's normal. It has been. That's, I think, since the very start of the Industrial Revolution, there has been constant change. 300 years ago, it was like 3,000 years ago. That's the interesting thing. Up to 300 years ago, you could go back in past 3,000 years. It would be mostly the same thing. And then with the Industrial Revolution, we ended up in I would say, a spiral of increasing knowledge. That just improve everything. So yes, I think we can all expect change, and I think the worst that we can expect is pure stagnation. Is probably the worst that a country can expect.
So then, Joannes, well, to provide some sort of symmetry, storytelling symmetry, if you were to collapse all of this down into a memo, which I know you love, what would the memo for this long podcast with Eric, what would it be? And then Eric, I'll ask you as well.
If we want to summarize, and fair to the position of Eric would be, there are methods where you can achieve your company-wide synchronization, company-wide consensus that are less wasteful than probably what you're doing. That I would agree. And my counterpoint, and that's a claim, and I'm not going to go into the detail of supporting this claim, is that while you can get those benefits, there are even bigger benefits, opportunities, by challenging the idea that you operate through people by going through a software-mediated sort of paradigm. But then I will leave this claim unsupported, because otherwise I'm going to take yet another hour to go into that.
Thank you. And Eric, your Jerry Maguire style memo?
My Jerry Maguire, the reality of where we are now is S&OP is increasing in adoption. It is filling a void right now of what we have. You do see benefits as you incrementally improve the process. And if you want to understand what it is and get on that journey and incrementally improve, buy my book.
Joannes, thank you for your time. And Eric, thank you very much for joining us for so long as well.
It's
been great having you.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.